Welcome to the AmericanaMusic.com podcast with your host, Sarah Popejoy.
Today on AmericanaMusic.com podcast, we're interviewing Sierra Hull, two-time Grammy-nominated artist, six-time IBMA Mandolin Player of the Year. She's performed at Carnegie Hall, the Grand Ole Opry, and the White House. She's collaborated with Dolly Parton, Garth Brooks, Alison Krauss, Bela Fleck, Brandie Carlile, and Billy Strings. She's releasing her fourth studio album, Tiptoe High Wire, this Friday, March 7th. Welcome, Sierra.
Hey, Sarah. Thank you so much. Good to be with you.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to have you today. Sierra, can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how you got started playing mandolin and writing songs?
Sure. Yeah, I'm from a little town in Tennessee called Birdstown, so a very rural part of the state. There's about 700 people there, something like that, between 700 and 800 people, no red light. So very much a Mayberry kind of town where everybody knows everybody, but a great part of the world for a lot of music and church, bluegrass music, country music kind of as a way of life, a lot of people. And that was certainly the way it was for my family. Everybody kind of going back on really both sides of my family. I think just church music, old hymns, things like that, being songs that kind of carried people through their week and through the hard times. So, even going back to my grandparents, everybody growing up in that kind of rural Appalachian setting, not coming from a lot of wealth and education, those kind of things, but really strong, tough people. And I think music was a big part of coping in those tough times. Mm-hmm. So for me, the way that kind of unfolded for my journey to music is my dad started learning guitar a little bit when I was maybe around 6 or 7 years old. I even remember my mom playing a little guitar at one point. My dad got really into bluegrass, and we had been listening to a lot of bluegrass gospel, singing music that way. And then my Uncle Junior, it was my granny's older sister, Betty, married a man named Junior who lived in the next town over. And my mom spent a lot of time with them as a kid. And so she and my dad built a house pretty much next door to them. So I kind of grew up almost like second set of grandparents. It felt like being right there next to my great aunt and great uncle. And so anytime I would walk in their house, he'd be playing little tunes on the mandolin or guitar or fiddle. So those instruments were familiar sounding. He wasn't a super virtuosic musician necessarily. He wasn't trying to be on a stage. None of my family were like performers in that way, but just loved music, So he'd play things like Wildwood Flower or old kind of hymns, things like that. And then it was my dad who started getting into bluegrass and started going to some bluegrass jam. And then next thing you know, we're sort of listening to tons of bluegrass music in the house and in the car and tagging along to these jams. And so as my brother was learning to play an instrument, I got my first instrument at 8, which was a fiddle. It was too big for me to really do much with. It was a Christmas present, but I was tiny. So by the time I reached my left hand all the way out, I couldn't even get to the end of the fingerboard. But the mandolin and fiddle are tuned the same, wildly different in technique between the bow and the pick and frets, no frets, but all the note placement, the layout of everything is the same on the left hand. My dad had just started learning mandolin himself and put one in my hands and taught me my first tune, kind of thinking, well, this will jumpstart the fiddle experience when I can finally get a smaller one. But I just fell in love with the mandolin.
That's so cool. That's so cool. I remember when I got back home here in Oklahoma, I'm in Tulsa, Broken Arrow to be exact, but Tulsa area, there's a fiddle shop. I wonder if they have any mandolins there. And they didn't. I was like, what are you guys doing? This crazy lady coming in saying they need to be carrying mandolins. What's funny is I went in a few years later and they were carrying mandolins.
Oh, right. Well, they took your advice. That's good.
You've won several IBMA Mandolin Player of the Year awards. You've been performing since you were 13?
Yeah, I'd say that even before that, really. I mean, I signed my first record deal at 13 and kind of had my first version of a band around that time. But I was already getting to perform and do some traveling, even like going back on kind of the most local of stages when I was, even younger than that, 9. I mean, from early on, I was very much welcomed into the circle by a lot of the local musicians, especially in the area. Met my hero, Alison Krauss, when I was 10 and then got to do some stuff with her when I was about 11. So,
oh my,
I started performing quite young, really. But I mean, of course, I was always a student. I went to public school and was just kind of doing things, the opportunities that came up that were possible in between all of that kind of normal kid stuff too.
That's cool. That's cool. Who were some of of your early musical influences?
Well, I mentioned Alison, her being one of my biggest heroes. I fell in love with her music when I was like 9 years old. But some of the earliest music I remember hearing would have been Joel Lawson and Quicksilver, the kind of the bluegrass gospel stuff, Larry Spark, Nickel Creek on the other side of that spectrum, some Dolly, of course. Also, like I was hearing a lot of mainstream country music on the radio. That was kind of the main thing that you would hear around where I grew up. We didn't have a major radio station in our little town, of course, but the station about an hour away. Most of them were either pop music or country music. But man, we were listening to a lot of bluegrass in our house. Tony Rice being one of my biggest heroes ever. I can go on and on and on. It was really bluegrass centric. And then while at the same time I was going to the jams on the weekend, every Friday and Saturday night, learning the traditional songs and the traditional catalog of what we sort of think of as bluegrass music. That's like the music of Bill Monroe and Platt and Scruggs and the Stanley Brothers, Reno and Smiley, all that good stuff, just of those songs. I was learning to sing harmony and jam along with all these musicians.
The core of your music, it definitely has a bluegrass element, but I hear so many other influences as well. I hear a little bit of jazz, a little bit of blues, a slight bit of rock, and some gospel elements as well. It's like your base paint is bluegrass, and then you put all these other colors from different genres in it. Can you talk a little bit about your approach musically with writing songs?
Yeah, I think you're right in that, the base paint is definitely bluegrass. That's my root. That's the thing I cut my teeth on. It's what I have the most hours of my musical world, kind of wrapped up in. But I've also always loved a lot of different things. I've always been really open-minded about music, and I think my career has led me to some interesting collaborations that have allowed me to, as a mandolin player, when you think of mandolin at the core of sort of American music, bluegrass is kind of at the top of the list of what kind of music you think is affiliated with the instrument. You do get little pieces of it scattered throughout some popular music, but it's not often an instrument everybody even knows what it is. I can't tell you how often I get in like an Uber or something, or I'm walking through the airport, what you got in the case? It's a mandolin. And, a lot of times they know, but sometimes they're like, what's that? What's the little guitar thingy? So I feel like the bluegrass thing obviously been a very natural, easy place to exist with the instrument I play and all that stuff. But I've been really fortunate to get invited into some outside worlds and collaborations that have allowed me to grow and explore as well. And as just a lover of everything from Beyonce to Joni Mitchell, you name it.
Yeah.
It's hard not to, as a listener, absorb certain things and then be able to carry that into your own thing.
Right.
Just simply a fan of something.
Yeah, definitely. And I also noticed you have, I say electric guitar. It's not in your face, even a little bit of percussion there as well, which is not always synonymous with bluegrass music, but you make it work. Can you talk a little bit about how you come about adding some of these other instruments and how it evolved with your music?
Yeah, well, traditionally growing up, my first couple records were sort of what you'd think of as the bluegrass instrumentation, like the core instrumentation with upright bass, acoustic guitar, fiddle, banjo, mandolin, dobro occasionally as well. And then, fast forward, I made a record called Weighted Mind, which I used a lot of octave mandolin, which is just one octave lower than the regular mandolin, a little bigger, still the mandolin voicings, a little more guitar-like, and was exploring my songwriting a lot around that time too. And in a way that when everything's stripped away, you're able to kind of explore some different things and not feel trapped in just like a particular genre box, if that makes sense. And so around that period, I think my songwriting opened up in a way that gave me some freedoms to just go, well, what does the song want to have on it? What am I hearing in my head that could work with this if I'm not only restricting myself to the bluegrass instrumentation? And then so the next record, 25 Trips, leaned into that even a little bit more. That was the first time that I'd ever had any kind of drum elements on any of my recordings. And that was when I started kind of thinking about, okay, well, maybe half the record has drums. There's a little bit of electric. There was a great guitar player I was named Mike Steele that was touring with me some. And again, I was starting to just kind of recruit musicians that inspired me, not based on the instrument they played, but based on their musicality and the way that I would be inspired by their musicianship. And so some of that was the choice to put, drums or electric guitar, for example, on that record. Well, then the pandemic hit when my last record came out, 25 Trips. I was like a week into the pandemic and my whole tour canceled. So I didn't really get to play that music live, but I was at that point toying with the idea of adding drums to the live show, but I knew it couldn't just be any drummer because my role as a mandolin player in the bluegrass setting is to kind of be the drummer. In bluegrass, the role of the mandolin, we do a thing called chopping. And so the chop is sort of like the snare drum. So when you think about, the way a snare drum hits, rhythmically in popular music, well, the mandolin does that in bluegrass. So it's very easy with these acoustic kind of tiny instruments that aren't amped up and things like that to get swallowed up by something as big as the drums or electric guitar.
Mm-hmm.
So it can't just be throwing these instruments. It's kind of, you use the paint analogy. When your bass kind of is the bluegrass bass paint, so to speak, it's more about like really delicately adding these textures and not kind of throwing them on top of the thing, because they can so easily, the nuances of the instruments and the simplicity of what those instruments do is part of what keeps it special, I think, so I knew it had to be the right musicians who have the sensibilities to be able to lean into that. So it was only after when in 2021, I finally got to put a band together kind of on the heels of the pandemic after my other record had already been out almost a year and a half at that point. It was exciting to finally get to explore some music off that record. But then I was already thinking about creating music that particular, like new music, this band I assembled could maybe play. And some of that music as a result then became the music for A Tiptoe High Wire, the new record.
Right. Very cool. You're really engaging live. Do you throw in a lot of improv when you play, or do you try to make them sound just like the record, kind of like country music does? Or is there a little more play there?
There's a lot of play. Yeah, I think I would say because I grew up in bluegrass music, which puts so much emphasis on improvisation, freedom to explore solos and different things like that. That part of me is always going to be there and always want to explore that. But I do love being able to explore different themes in my songwriting. So maybe I might write something that has a particular motif or riff that the song's kind of built on, that every time you go to play it, you want to hear that particular thing. Even a song like Boom, the first single that we released off the album, there's a particular melodic thing that the mandolin and the guitar plays. It's not very bluegrass. It's a very different kind of role than what the bluegrass mandolin seat would normally require. But that sort of combined with the bluegrass elements of when the solo hits, being able to play anything in the solo section you want to play. It's just there's a kind of a hybrid of freedom and discipline in a lot of the stuff I'm trying to write, where I can like kind of wear both hats, because I love really highly arranged music where when something hits, I'm playing one thing, the other musicians are playing another thing. It's only when the collective sum comes together that the thing is revealed. And I think there's a lot of beauty in that in terms of arranging and writing, but then being able to have moments where one person can really step out and let their personality shine and be very in the moment. I think that's super important, a special part of what music is for us. So
right.
Kind of bridge the gap there a little bit.
That's so cool. I want to talk about some of the singles that you've already released off that album. The first one, Spitfire, it's got a really cool guitar groove in the video. Women are holding up pictures of, I don't know if they're all their grandmothers or strong women in their life.
Combination.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about the inspiration for that song?
Yeah, I wrote that song about my granny, my Spitfire granny. I sort of was talking about my upbringing a little bit there, and sort of the kind of nature of how all my family comes from that part of the world in Tennessee for kind of as far back as we can really remember. But, that woman lived a lot of life in her 80 years. She passed about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years. But I started writing this song and just thinking about, not just her. And I felt like her story was the way to tell it and kind of honor her life and all that I felt like she had lived through. But also it's really kind of just a story of resilience for all the people in our life. Like, I don't explicitly say, this is my granny. I never name her name in the song. It's more talking about someone's life who's overcoming the earliest parts of her life till later in her life in the shortest condensed version one can do in the song. But really just the idea of celebrating the resilient souls that we all know, somebody who's kind of a Spitfire that's been toughened by life and the things they've had to go through and the strength that comes with that. That was my granny. Yeah. I mean, the first verse says, young love, 1 month a wife, the river took him under, took his life. And she cried, oh Lord, how can I be a widow before 18? And that's 100% true. I mean,
wow.
My granny, 1 month into her marriage, as a lot of young women back in that time did, especially in rural Appalachia, got married young. She's 17, almost 18, I think, and watched her husband drown right in front of her. A tragedy.
Oh my gosh.
To that early in your life, have that kind of loss all the way through just all the other things that life can bring, when you live 80 years. I mean, I think she went through more than most even. So there's a certain kind of strength one just inevitably has to have through, and I always saw that in her.
Wow. What a story. I think it resonates with a lot of people because of collaboratively, not just the nation, but the whole world. We've gone through a lot with the pandemic and just everything going on. Having a story like that of someone who's been through a lot of stuff really just, like I said, resonates with a lot of people.
That song is the song that the title of the album comes from. There's a lyric in there that says Queen of a Tiptoe High Wire.
Okay.
Felt like a fitting way to kind of like think about this. This record is so much about trying to lean into my root, both personally, both musically, but also pressing forward into new territory for me, both musically and personally. And, with this being my first indie release, trying to bridge the gap between the roots of the music I love and the instrument I play and where I truly come from, but also trying to push the boundaries of my own music and find ways to still explore and be interested in everything, and even when that's a little scary sometimes, the kind of stepping out and trying to balance all these things. A Tiptoe High Wire just like to me painted the picture of the way I feel about this body of work and, kind of where I come from, if that makes sense.
Yeah, most definitely. You were talking about the song Boom earlier, which is the first song on the album. That song's so much fun. It's very rhythmic. What I love is that the video for the song, you have a live version of this song where you and your band are playing in Mexico. Can you just talk a little bit about the song and the video too?
Sure. Yeah. Well, this song, you mentioned it being rhythmic and fun. That's how I think about this song. You have songs like Spitfire, the song we were talking about, the title track from the record, being able to, as a songwriter, explore lyrics that are really kind of deep and meaningful in that way. And the music obviously being a big part of it too. But then there's some songs that musically you can just kind of lean into in this way that's like feel good, and it was important to me. So much of the music I grew up loving really has a joyful energy to it. And so I wanted like that to be reflected throughout this project as well. And Boom, from the time I wrote that with a good friend of mine in Nashville named Adam Wright, great songwriter. And it kind of had the opening guitar riff as, the inspiration and, talking about just letting a little sunlight in and, it's a beautiful day. So let the shadows fade away. Well, we were down playing a festival in Mexico. Actually, we've got to go the past 2 years, which is pretty exciting. We played a festival called Dead Ahead last year. And then just this past January, we're just down for the Dave Matthews and Tim Reynolds festival down there in Riviera Maya, Mexico. So it felt so fitting to do, of all songs, Boom on the beach, to do a little boom on the beach because, right there with the sun shining, and it just felt like it fit the spirit of that song for me.
Yeah, it was a cool video. I liked it. It was cool. So your song, Come Out of My Blues, which is the third single, I would describe it as a hard-driving bluegrass song. It features Tim O'Brien, and you co-wrote the song with Pat McLaughlin, who, as a side note, co-wrote songs with John Prine and co-wrote his final recorded song as well. What was it like writing with someone like that? Because I saw that you said that John Prine was a big hero of yours.
Yeah, I think of songwriting and very conversational songwriting. It's easy to write something in a way that's super like far out and wildly different and, exploring the abstract. I won't say easy, but like, there's a lot of liberties one can take when that's the avenue. I think I find it really hard and probably more rewarding even when you can find a really simple way to say something powerful and have a certain message be evoked. And I feel like, John was a master of that. And I mean, in a poetic way, but in a way that like was so, tangible. There were some songs that he'd written with Pat that I just loved. And after John passed, I kind of was like, man, it would be really cool to write a song with Pat. And we've only written once, and Come Out of My Blues is where we wound up. We wrote it originally as this kind of almost like country kind of feeling song. He had the starting lyrics of this, birds are singing right outside my door, songs I've never heard them singing before. I'm loving on you and the things you do. Let's go walking for a mile or two. I was just like, that just sounds like you're talking to your loved one, let's go, give me a minute so I can find my shoes. I mean, there's just like the spirit of that song felt like it reflected a certain feeling that I was certainly feeling around the time we were writing it, where you're sort of coming out of this period of what feels like a dark spell and sort of seeing the light and ready to just kind of similarly to Boom in a way, just let the light in. And so I loved the way these lyrics made me feel. But after we finished the song, I kind of felt like, though I liked the melody, I didn't really see it fitting into the batch of songs that I was working on for this record. It sort of, I wasn't even sure that it was a song that necessarily fit me as an artist, but I kept thinking, I still love the song and I think this would be great for somebody. But then I was playing with a weird tuning on the mandolin, kind of like not a standard thing. I was changing strings and wound up like in some kind of odd cross tuning. And I remember like playing what you hear of that opening mandolin, the mandolin line, the kind of rolling riff. And I kept thinking, well, this would be really fun to play. And at the time, the touring band I had put together back in 21 had been playing together for a little while already. And I was kind of imagining stuff that we could play together and what I wanted that to feel like in a live setting. And is, again, trying to bridge the gap between the traditional and the progressive elements, with the mandolin tuning already making it feel like very progressive and unconventional, but then kind of just imagining, but what if we had Paul Hammer banjo and an old time fiddle lyrical kind of anthemic feeling thing. So the melody to me lent itself to that, where there's kind of this jam in the middle and it's sort of just a fun track. And I had the lyrics that Pat and I had written to Come Out of My Blues handy on my computer. We had just written the song the week before or something, so it was right in front of me. And as I'll do sometimes, I'll kind of pull up lyrics and kind of faux sing a working melody to just kind of like have something to sing over. And I thought, oh man, these lyrics they really fit the thing I'm playing here. And I thought, but I can't use these lyrics because they're already a song. I can't steal the lyrics. We've already written this. So I kept thinking, well, here's kind of the song. And I was using our lyrics to be the filler, if that makes sense. Kept thinking, I've got to rewrite this. But man, in anything I'd try to write didn't feel as natural and good as the Come Out of My Blues original lyrics. And so with Pat's permission, we already have this existing melody, but I've been playing around with this kind of alternate melody. And I feel like this really fits the live show kind of vibe and would really fit into this record if I workshop this. And so with his permission, I kind of rewrote the melody to our lyric. And yeah, it kind of became this fun, old-timey, almost instrumental jam in the middle of it. And then, of course, Tim O'Brien being the icing on the cake, one of my biggest heroes and such an amazing singer and player.
Yeah, definitely. Some of the other songs that'll be coming out of this album, E-Tune is a cool, funky instrumental. Bela Fleck is on the song as well. Can you talk a little bit about writing and recording that song?
Yeah, well, I've been lucky to work with Bela a lot over the last few years. He produced my Weighted Mind album, the one I was talking about that was more songwriter forward, kind of stripped down instrumentation. And then I got to be a big part of his, a couple projects actually, but My Bluegrass Heart was like a bluegrass record that he put out, his first kind of bluegrass album in like 20 years and features all my heroes and peers. And it's quite the project. And I was really lucky to be part of that and not only recording, but touring it. We were working together a lot and I'd actually already recorded E-Tune. It was a tune that I had around for a long time. I considered recording it for the Weighted Mind album and then we didn't end up doing it. I did record it for 25 Trips, but it didn't make the record. The cut it didn't feel like it belonged. You know, sometimes you have extra things you're trying to, I wanted to be able to record it, but I knew it needed to find its home in the right collection of songs. And so given all the work that I was doing with Bela at the time, and then just in the midst of working on this record, one day I just kind of thought, I feel like we're missing something on this track. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, what if we get Bela on it? And so I was lucky to be working with him so much at the time. We were able to get him to play on it. And I felt like it was kind of only then that the track really clicked and felt like it was at home and really meant to finally make its way into the world.
Yeah, sometimes it just doesn't work out for songs on certain albums. They just don't fit or they just don't,
Yeah, and it's funny how they can kind of, find their way much later. And that was definitely one of them.
That's cool. Also, your song, which you've got a lot more than these, but these are some of the ones that just kind of spoke to me. Haven Hill, the last song on the album. Can you talk a little bit about the story behind that?
For sure. Yeah, Haven Hill is a really special one to me. I wrote this song right after, talked a lot about my grandma, but there's sort of just a strong family presence throughout the record and thinking about my roots and where I come from. And my husband, Justin, he's from East Tennessee. His family grew up very similar to mine. I called her Granny. He's got a mama. I've got a grannies, It's not the only difference, really. One of his grandmothers passed away a few years ago, and the place that she's buried is a place called Haven Hill. And I just thought that was such a beautiful, peaceful sounding spot. So there's certain things in that song that kind of talk about her story a little bit. There's the take a breath, the fight is o'er, fiddle plays, white dove soar. That was sort of me thinking about Justin played fiddle when we buried her in Haven Hill, and they released these beautiful white doves at her gravesite. Wow. The image of that, but also with Haven Hill, again, trying to lean into like a bigger meaning of Haven Hill, kind of just being a metaphor for whatever the end of life looks like. That place that I think that we all hope to get to of peace and happiness at the end of our life. Between home and Haven Hill, and kind of just this idea of not letting life pass us by, trying to lean into the joys, the laughter, the tears. There's going to be all of it, but trying to live our fullest life. That's what I wanted that song to be about, with Haven Hill just kind of being a metaphor for that.
You're definitely a wordsmith and a great musician, which is, you don't always find those two.
Thank you. That's super kind.
When you go out and play live, you and your band play live, what is your goal or what do you hope happens when you get on stage?
I love performing. I think because I started doing it so young, there's a real at-home feeling with being on stage and performing. And I think it's made all the more comfortable and exciting when you can surround yourself with just top-tier musicians. And not only that, but really wonderful people. I was just thinking, we started the kind of album release tour this week, and we're 4 shows in, and today's our first off day. And last night sort of felt like we were laughing, saying by night 4 on tour, everybody's really settled in. There's those first few days if you're getting back into it, both in the show and knocking off the dust, and everybody's settling in, squeezing in the bus, and finding your little nook and all that kind of stuff. And then by night 4, you're in it. We're out here, we're doing the thing where everybody's in a flow and in a groove. And I think when you can find people you connect with both personally and musically, and it's one of the great joys about making this record, with it being my first independent release, which is interesting because I'm sort of a backward story from most in that I signed with Rounder when I was 13 years old. I've never got to really release an album independently. Fulfilled my contract and recorded my records that were, part of that there. And I'm so, so grateful for that experience. But this is a new chapter in that regard. And it's also a new chapter in really feeling like the music of this record, a lot of it truly was inspired by getting to work with the musicians that are touring with me right now and their involvement and investment in the music. It means a great deal to me. It's different when you have musicians that were a part of the earliest roots of the song, of me going, hey, I kind of wrote this with this in mind, and then they bring their magic to it. This record feels like the first time I've really been able to take the music to the stage in a very similar way to what we were able to take it to the studio, rather than it being so-and-so played fiddle on this track and somebody else is on guitar, and a hybrid of my heroes and musicians I love, which I've made a lot of records that way, and that's been a beautiful thing. But as far as like a full band project, then I can go play live. There's a lot of their imprint on this record. And so, I don't know, it just feels like a really celebratory moment for all of us to get to experience the release of this album, and performing this music live has a deeper root than something that I've done in the past, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes total sense. Sierra, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I really, really have a lot of respect for what you do. Really cool to see what you've, I want to say, done with the format of Bluegrass. I don't know how else to say it. It's something new, inventive, and really cool.
Thank you. That means a lot.
It's just something I feel like I could listen to for hours too.
Oh man, well, that's all you hope for, is somebody making and creating music that you can, it's so ours as creators for the longest time, with no one being able to hear it. And then when the moment comes that you can finally share it with other people, I mean, that's where the real reward comes, I think. And you hope that people can see themselves in it, find some enjoyment in it being part of their life. So I appreciate you listening deeply. That means a lot.
Do you have records on the
Yeah, we do.
website?
It's pretty exciting. I got the vinyl and CDs right before this tour started. And so you can get it on the website or at the live show.
Oh, awesome, awesome. Check out Sierra Hall's Tiptoe High Wire. Just released this past Friday. You're going to love the album. Meanwhile, here's a short clip to next week's interview with the Doohickeys. Yeehaw! Are you guys in LA still now, or?
We're both based in Glendale.
Okay. Where is Glendale?
It's just kind of northeast of downtown. It's still Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
Own police and own fire department.
We got our own mayor, so when there's certain problems in Los Angeles, they go, you voted for this. I go, I actually did not. I'm not a part of this. I have my own thing.
Were you guys close to the fires, or were you affected by it at all?
We got very lucky. Our houses are both fine. We were able to go and get out of the city when it was all happening. We evacuated to our friend's house in Studio City, and then we evacuated from her house to Orange County.
Yeah, we were woken up by like the Amber Alert alarm on your phone.
Oh.
Glendale sections, blah, blah, blah. You gotta go. I'm like, what? It's like every little section of the city had a code, but none of us had been through anything like this, so no one knew what our code was. They're just like, hey, you have an alert on your phone. You should probably leave. I'm like, okay. And then your throat hurt. You looked outside and the sky is like orange and black, and you're like, oh God, it's right on top of me.
Oh, wow.
Go, go, go. And just, I only packed up instruments and Western clothes. Like nothing else mattered to me in that moment.
It was funny to see what mattered to you in the 30-minute evacuation planning. It was like, yeah, truly only instruments and cats for me. I didn't bring any clothes. I should have brought more.
My parents like, did you grab your birth certificate? I went, I don't know where that is. That stuff I don't look at very often, so I don't quite remember where I put it. It's in some drawer somewhere.
Yeah. But we made it out okay. And we actually raised a lot of money for the fires at our first album release show at Margaritaville. Put all of the money towards LA fires and made over $2,000, I think.